by and large, we've all got the same kit, and it's there, ready, with a set of default programs, but ready to be upgraded through engagement with the world, through learning, growing, and changing. Hey there, how's it going? This is James Tripp. This is a video for James Tripp Chaos Wave. The question today is, am I too old to change? So, a couple of weeks ago, I put out a video on 3 transformative practices. I got a fantastic question in the comments section from Henry Alexander. Henry asks, I'm 32 years old. Is it difficult to change the mind and thus the life when we get older? I have a mindset that even if I'm not old enough to have a stubborn mind, it will still be a slower process than before when I was in my 20s. So thank you, Henry, for asking this question, because I know that there is a belief, this is a belief that not only you hold, but it's deeply entrenched in our culture. There's this expression, everybody's heard it, you cannot teach an old dog new tricks. And it was largely believed, it was even the scientific consensus up to the 1990s, that we had these formative years where we would learn, grow, change, develop habits of response, patterns of engagement, all of these sorts of things, formative years, and then they would come to an end, and our brain would somehow, ossify into this fixed, geological, rendered, unmoving us. That was once the belief. Well, guess what? Turns out not to be true. I'm going to share with you here a little piece. It's the intro piece from a paper called Aging and Brain Plasticity by Lisa Pauls, Seema Chalavi, and Stephen P. Swinnell. Okay, I'm going to share this piece, and before I do, I want to just lay something out for you. Who you are, how you are, in a sense, it's a collection of patterns of response and engagement with the world. And they are, contrary to what most people think, largely learned. Okay, largely learned. Most of what you do, most of what you are, your patterns of engagement are learned, built across time. They get encoded into your brain. Every skill you have, every understanding you have, every habit you have, every pattern of response, it's a brain circuit. It's a brain circuit. You've got the psychological, you've got the neurological. They mirror each other. It's all brain circuits. The thinking you do is those brain circuits firing, if we're going to run on this model for a bit. So what's important when we want to change ourselves is our ability to rewire those brain circuits. And this is what neuroplasticity is about. And this is why the things discovered since the new imaging technology of the 1990s came in, making it the decade of the brain, what has been discovered since is going to answer your question, Henry. So I'm going to read this excerpt from this paper. For a long time, it has been assumed that brain plasticity peaks at a young age and then gradually decreases as one gets older. This is also underscored by the expression that one cannot teach an old dog new tricks, implying that people who have become used to doing things in a particular way will not easily abandon their habits and change their behavior. Interestingly, thanks to the tremendous advances in medical imaging techniques for assessment of brain structure and function, mounting evidence for lifelong brain plasticity has been generated over the past years. Practice leads to improvement in and refinement of performance on motor or any other tasks, and this dynamic behavioral process is associated with altered brain activity, occurring in a similar manner in younger and older adults. Besides functional brain changes, practice also induces structural changes, such as alterations in regional brain grey and white matter structures that are typically recruited during task performance. So I wanted to share that with you, and particularly because at the end they're talking about practice, and the original video that the question was posted on was about transformative practices, transformative activities that you can do. Your brain will change. You get what you rehearse. So you can transform your brain by engaging daily in brain transforming practices. You do it all the time if you practice a new skill. So I want to say a few more things. I don't just want to leave it there on the subject of neuroplasticity. I want to go beyond that, because where does that idea come from? Where does it even come from? You can't teach an old dog new tricks. That expression predated any scientific consensus, the old scientific consensus, that we had these formative years, and when they were over, we just sort of stopped developing. In fact, the scientific consensus probably wasn't that scientific. It was probably based off this cultural belief. Well, I think there's a reason that people come to that conclusion. And I think the reason is they look at kids and they look how much kids learn, and then they look and they think, well, I don't seem to learn at that rate. Well, I'm going to offer you an alternative explanation for this that might help make sense of it. So moving away from speaking neurologically and moving into speaking perhaps psychologically, or what I would call pragmatic psychology, imagine for a moment that you have a faculty of mind that you could call your generative faculty. When a child or a baby comes into the world, they don't have any understandings about the world. They don't have any learnt patterns of engagement. They don't have any sense they've made. They are, in a sense, a kind of a blank slate. Not entirely a blank slate, because they have different brain modules that do different things. And they may have certain proclivities and predispositions due to genetic variances in the brain. But by and large, we've all got the same kit, and it's there ready with a set of default programs, but ready to be upgraded through engagement with the world, through learning, growing, and changing. Now, here's the thing. A baby has no way of making sense of anything. It has no skills, no patterns. It's just got these reflexes, a grasp reflex, a suckle reflex. It cries when it's hungry. It doesn't know what hungry is. It's just a reflex. It's not making sense. It's not really consciously trying to communicate anything. It's just a reflex. Now, the trouble with babies is, of course, they have no ability to bring themselves to bear upon the world with any power. They are powerless to shape their lives beyond crying and hoping that somebody comes to their aid. So they need to build a set of understandings up here and a set of patterns of engagement with the world that are going to serve them in living their lives, in surviving and ideally thriving. And this is the process they engage in. Now, going back to this idea of a generative faculty, I like to think of this as the capacity of mind that we all innately possess to start building sense of the world and start building patterns of engagement. The generative faculty is what does this work. And when we come into the world, the generative faculty is highly motivated. Why? Because it's got nothing. It's got nothing. It's got nothing to use. No understandings, no patterns of engagement, nothing. It needs to get stuff together pretty quickly. So when we're kids, we're highly motivated to learn. We devour learning. We absorb like sponges. We put stuff together. I'm going to argue here that it's because we have a massive motivation to do so. Because when you ain't got nothing, you got to get something. So we've got this motivation rolling and in place. Now, as we grow, as we put together our understanding, our maps of the world, our patterns of engagement, we get to a point where we start thinking, yeah, I got this stuff pretty nailed down. I got this pretty sorted out. You know, who doesn't know a teenager who thinks they know everything, right? Forgive me, teenagers who might be watching this. I suspect there aren't that many, but, you know, I did. I thought I knew how the world worked. I thought I knew what was up, what was down by the time I reached my teenage years. Whilst I thought I knew what was going on, actually, my patterns of adaptation for life were not great. My brain, my mind, my patterns of engagement were not set up to create the life that I wanted, speaking personally. So I had this thing where I thought I knew everything, but actually I was all maladapted. I wasn't a good fit for the life that I wanted to create. So this is a problem that many of us face, is once we think we know what's what, our generative faculty switches off. It switches off. I often ask clients, when I'm working with clients, I ask the question, do you drive? And a large number of my clients do. So if they answer yes, I always ask this follow-up question. When was the last time you got any better at driving? And it's extraordinarily rare, I'm not sure it's ever happened, that someone said, oh yeah, last week. So what they find is when they first learned to drive, they learned a lot. They went from not being able to drive to being able to drive. And then they pass their test, they get out on the road, they refine, they tune things up, and then they stop getting any better. Why? Because their generative faculty has decided they're good enough. This is good enough. So it goes offline. But if one of these clients that I have who has not improved their driving for a long time went to a motorsports event and got bitten by the bug and was like, do you know what? I'd love to learn to drive like that. That's what I'm going to do. You know, they watched a rally or something, and then they went to rally driving school and started really bringing consciousness and working on upgrading their driving skills. You bet the generative faculty will come back online and they will start to learn. So we are always capable of adapting our brains, always capable of modifying circuitry, building new circuitry, building in new understandings, new patterns of engagement. This capability never leaves us. Maybe when we're really, really super old, I don't know, but for most of our lives, it doesn't leave us. It remains there, but there are barriers to it coming back online. It gets lazy, right? It's offline. It's like my work here is done. There are barriers to it coming back online. And one of the major barriers of it coming back online is the belief that this is how it is, this is how I am. It's beliefs that get in the way. It's beliefs. So when you come to that point of going, do you know what? I can learn, I can change, I can grow, and you put the time into doing it, because kids put a lot of time in. It might be unconsciously driven, but they put a lot of time in to building their understandings and their patterns of engagement. And this is something I'm going to add here. Kids and adults, the truth of the matter is adults are actually empowered in many ways to learn more effectively than kids, to change themselves more effectively than kids are. But I'll come back to that in a moment. So what we have is we have barriers that get in the way and have the generative faculty get offline, the barrier of I think I know how it is anyway, I think I know how things are. Yeah, that's a major barrier. I can't change anyway. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. What's the point? That's another barrier. These things keep the generative faculty offline. But when you switch it back online and you pick what it is that you want to develop, I'm always talking about to my coaching clients about what's your developmental edge. What are you currently looking to shift? What are you currently looking to make changes, make gains, make transformations? What's your developmental edge? When you know what it is, you lean into it and you have good strategies for doing so, you can really make very, very rapid, very, very profound changes in yourself and in your life. So before I talk about the skills of self-transformation and learning, which I'm going to touch on here, I want to say something about developmental windows. There's another factor in the mix here that I do want to acknowledge. Whilst brain plasticity remains profound and significant throughout our lives, it does seem to be that there are certain developmental windows when things are easier. So a classic example is language acquisition. Language acquisition is, there's a developmental window for easy language acquisition, which is why if you raise little kids bilingually, it's very easy for them to pick up 2 languages. It's not a big effort. But if you're trying to teach an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old a second language, it's much more difficult because they kind of miss that developmental window when the brain is open to that specific kind of a thing. So that's one example, and there are no doubt other examples of developmental windows. What this does not mean, however, is once a developmental window has passed, that you can no longer learn. It means that it is going to be a bit more challenging. So learning a second language at 12 years old is much more challenging than learning a second language at 2 years old. Much more challenging. But it doesn't mean that it cannot be done. And these developmental windows, whilst they are assets for certain sorts of transformation at certain sorts of time, they can be compensated for in other ways. And this is what I want to move on to now. In a great many ways, I am a more effective learner, changer, and grower than I have ever been. I'm 45 years old. I keep getting better at learning. I keep getting better at self-transformation because there are certain meta skills to this. You can not only learn, but you can learn how to learn. Learn how to learn effectively and efficiently. And I see this quite a lot because I have children. I have a 10-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old daughter. and my wife and I, we home educate them. And what that means, by the way, is not that we're there being their tutors all the time. We curate their education. So we get different tutors for different things. It keeps us alive and switched on to what they're learning, and keeps us monitoring what they're learning, rather than abdicating responsibility for that and putting the responsibility off to an outside agency such as a school. So whilst we recruit the tutors, we are constantly monitoring the education and what is the curriculum and all of this kind of thing. But oftentimes I end up learning things alongside my daughter. So one example is my older daughter who's 13, last year we were both doing capoeira together. And in some ways, there are certain things she would pick up more easily than me, but in aggregate, I learned a lot faster than she did. And the simple reason was I've got good learning strategies. I've got good learning strategies for learning physical patterns. Why? Because I've done a lot of it and I've built those learning strategies. I've built a technology for rapidly learning physical patterns. And that really served me. So she's kind of in this age where she's likely to be naturally probably in a better developmental window than I am for picking up this stuff. It's certainly true she's got assets that are more challenging for me. She's incredibly flexible compared to me, therefore making some of the flexibility-based stuff a lot easier for her to pick up. But aside from that, when it comes to picking up the patterns, getting it in the brain, in that instance, I was more efficient and effective than she is. And there's a reason for that. I got strategies, I've got techniques, I know what to do, I know what to look for. I am a significantly better conscious learner than my daughter. Which is not to knock my daughter, she's just never learned those conscious patterns of learning and perhaps doesn't have the same interests, but this is not an insignificant thing. So one of the things that I advocate hugely, this is something I really lean into in the self-hypnosis and personal alchemy material that I teach, it's that developing these meta skills of self-transformation and developing practices of self-transformation and developing understandings that aid you in transforming yourself to be the person you wish to be in your life, to be more adept at shaping life in accordance with your values in ways that create fulfillment, in ways that create enrichment and wealth and good health and all of these good things. We don't have to get left with the default set of understandings that we happen to pick up through our unconscious but highly efficient learning period of our formative years. What we can develop is high levels of learning and transformative consciousness and understanding within ourselves that make us highly effective, highly adept at utilizing this neuroplasticity that they're pointing out in this article and in many other pieces of research remains highly functional, highly fecund, is that the right word? Fecundity, bearing of offspring and fruit for our entire lives. So this is what I wanted to say in this video. So what do you make of this? Does this make sense for you? Does it click? If you like the video, if you got something from it, please do give it the thumbs up. And also you can subscribe to this channel for more on using your mind to shape your life, for more understandings, insights into self-transformation, adaptiveness, creation psychology, all of these things. They're all here. So hit that subscribe, hit the notifications bell. If you have any questions, make use of the comments section or any feedback as well. That's there so this conversation can continue.